The wind screamed through the gap in the shutters again tonight, not like a wind of this world, but something older, angrier, dragging its long nails across the wooden frame of a hut that had stood too long without. Joy Doughton sighed. The fire had become a rumor, a red pulse beneath grey ash. The mother stirred what remained in the pot-thin broth, more memory than meal. Her hand moved slowly, wrapped in linen so thin it had frozen to her skin. Blood had stopped flowing to her fingertips days ago. Still, she stirred. Because movement meant belief, because stillness was surrender, her children no longer asked when their father would return. They curled like roots beneath the blanket, breathing in shallow rhythm, as if drawing too much air might waste what warmth they had. Their breath hovered above their faces like frightened ghosts unwilling to settle dot outside. The world had lost color. The trees no longer whispered. They creaked, groaning like old men too tired to stand. Black crows dotted the branches like punctuation marks in a silent curse. They did not cry. They only watched Dot in the village below. The forge stood open and lifeless. The anvil, once the heartbeat of the square, lay rimmed with frost, its echo long silenced. The chapel door hung crooked on its hinges, swaying in a breeze that never entered, as if even the wind feared to go inside. The bell had frozen in place, a silent tongue in a stone throat. The priest-father Theodric murmured from his cot, scripture tangled with fever. He no longer rose. He no longer looked toward heaven, not since the widow's baby froze in her cradle, and he had no words left to give. They called it the old winter, the cursed season, the punishment for sins too old to name. Some believed it was a reckoning. Others simply endured, wrapped in burlap and silence, waiting for God to remember them. Among them was a boy, Orlin, 10 winters behind him, and none so cruel. He had not spoken in 14 nights, not since his father walked into the woods with bow and prayer, and did not return each dusk. Orlin sat by the window. He did not cry. He did not call out. He only listened. The knife his father gave him pressed close beneath his tunic, its hilt warm from the touch of his small hand. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps. Other times he hoped he did not. The snow piled higher against the walls. Each morning it buried more than the doorstep. A hen, a neighbor, a grave. It fell so quietly it seemed holy, a blessing for the dead, a curse for the living. In the chapel, frost bloomed like veins across the stained glass, hiding saints behind patterns of ice. The candles would no longer hold flame. The oil had hardened, like the hearts of the elders who had begun to speak of leaving. Southward, to where the rivers still ran, to where birds did not fall mid-flight from frozen skies. But Orlin stayed, not from faith, from something deeper, from the ache that comes when love turns into memory and refuses to fade. He watched his mother sleep, curled upright, a ladle still, clutched in her palm. She did not dream anymore. She only waited, her breath shallow, as if fearing to inhale too much of what little life was left. Grief had shape now, a white fog curling along the chapel floor, the hollow clink of coins upon eyelids, a frozen well that no longer sang when a bucket dropped, Even the dogs no longer barked. They had either died or disappeared, perhaps wiser than men. The wolves, however, were near. Their howls began at twilight, low and distant. But each night, they crept closer, their hunger older than man was patient. And still, Orlin watched. The woods. He remembered how his father once taught him to read the snow, the way deer hooves made a hard print, how a man's stride staggered when he was tired, how the absence of tracks could sometimes mean more than presence. Now, all he saw was white, untouched, unforgiving. On the 15th night, the moon was full, a dull coin suspended above the world, casting light so cold it seemed to peel skin. The fire had gone out. The broth had dried to a crust along the pot's edge. His sister whimpered in her sleep, and Orlin rose. He moved quietly, as if he feared, disturbing the very walls. He pulled on his father's boots too large, cracked but familiar. He took the knife, tied it to his belt with a strip of cloth torn from the hem of his tunic. The door creaked as he opened it. The air rushed in like a blade. He did not flinch. The snow met his knees. The wind pulled at his sleeves like a grieving mother. But still, he walked past the empty forge, past the well sealed in ice, past the chapel where the bell hung like a forgotten tongue. He walked through the graveyard, where stones leaned like weary pilgrims, and he did not pause, not even at the one his father carved long ago for a brother Orlin never knew. The forest waited. It did not beckon. It did not resist. It simply stood, tall and dark and endless, and Orlin entered. His footprints stretched behind him like a broken sentence in snow. A question never finished, a prayer never spoken aloud in the dark. The trees whispered, or perhaps it was the wind, or memory, or fear. Still he walked. Somewhere ahead, perhaps, there was food, or shelter, or his father's body, or perhaps nothing. But staying had become a slow death, and leaving was at least a choice. Behind him, the village shrank into silence. Behind him, the moonlight filled in his steps. The boy walked deeper into the woods, beneath branches heavy with ice, toward the unseen, not knowing whether he sought survival or simply something to believe in. The darkness closed behind him like a door, and the snow began to fall again, soft, slow. Final yet ahead, just barely. Through the trees a flicker of orange, a distant fire, or eyes, or both. And so the story moved forward, carried by the footsteps of a child in a world that had forgotten what it meant to be warm. Snow fell like ash from a ruined sky, soft, slow, relentless. Not the snow of songs or joy, but a white burial, inch by inch. The monastery, nestled in a cradle of pine and stone, seemed less like a refuge now, and more like a tune carved by prayer and frost. The brothers moved through the cloister with the weight of old men, though many were young, their woolen habits stiff with ice, their hoods heavy with melt and silence. They did not speak not from vow, but from the knowledge that breath was too precious to waste on words. Each exhale hung in the air like incense, frail clouds that rose and vanished. as though even breath now feared to remain. The ancient stone beneath their sandals muffled every footstep, as if the monastery itself had begun to forget the sound of movement. They filed into the chapel, like ghosts returning to a place they once lived. The nave stretched before them, cold and vast, lined with candles that flickered with a desperation too human to be divine. The sconces trembled, the wax-wept dot on the northern wall. Behind iron grates, the relics of saints rested, bones of long dead, martyrs wrapped in velvet and forgotten litanies, once venerated, now simply witnesses, watching silently as faith frayed beneath the weight of the season. At the heart of the altar knelt Brother Eamon, barely 20 winters behind him, the youngest of the order, chosen for the midnight vigil, a task once reserved for the devout, now passed on to those who still had enough youth to endure the cold. Without succumbing too quickly to it, he knelt with trembling hands, his fingers blue at the tips, his eyes red from SLEEPLESS and ESS dot before him. The chalice waited, its surface silver and still. Eamon's breath curled around it in soft rings, like halos unraveling. The Latin prayers slipped from his cracked lips in a whisper. Words that once held fire now barely stirred the air. He glanced down and saw his own reflection in the pattern, a pale, gaunt boy rimmed with sorrow. The candlelight warped the image, and for a moment, he did not recognize himself. He had not spoken aloud in days. No one had. Silence had crept through the monastery not with force, but with the same slow certainty as frost on glass. It blurred. The world softened edges, erased names dot the scriptorium. Once alive with scratching quills and murmured dictation, now stood empty. Ink had frozen in the glass vials. Parchments curled at the corners, untouched dot no new words. Only the echo of old ones. And even those were fading dot beyond the thick chapel walls. In a stone room with one window and no saints, a single candle burned. In the infirmary, its light did not reach far, only enough to cast a faint glow on the sweat-slicked brow of Father Baru. He had been coughing for weeks. Some said it was fever. Others said something darker had entered him with the cold. He spoke, in riddles now, of wolves at the gates, of angels in the rafters, of a woman made of ice who kissed him in dreams. The brothers tried to comfort him, but even they could not tell, in this season, what was real and what was memory twisting beneath the weight of hunger and cold. Eamon remembered when Baruch had taught him to chant, when his voice had filled the chapel like a flame. Now that voice had thinned to vapor, curling weakly in the stale air outside. The wind howled like a distant choir, discordant, ragged, cold. It slithered through cracks in the stone, pulling at the tapestries, rattling the shutters like chains. The bell towers stood silent. The rope had snapped during the last storm. No toll, no call, just the stillness. Brother Ulrich had once said that winter made the veil thin, between the seen and unseen. He had seen the Virgin weep on the stained glass above the chapel door. And then he had vanished. They found his habit months later, stiff with frost, near the river's edge. His hands were folded in prayer, his eyes frozen open, as if still waiting for an answer. Now Eamon knelt where Ulrich once did, and as the night, deepened, the shadows stretched long across the stone floor. They moved when he did not. They whispered when he prayed. But he did not flee. There was nowhere left to run. The vigil ended at dawn. The light crept in slowly, pale and uncertain, as if even the sun was wary of entering such a place. When Brother Matthias arrived, his steps hesitant, his voice low, he found Eamon still at the altar, still kneeling, still watching. But he was no longer praying. His hands had frozen to the edge of the altar. His eyes, wide and glassy, were fixed on the crucifix above. There, upon the brow of the carved Saviour, ice hung like tears, crystallized grief, falling in silence. Matthias did not weep. There were no tears left in him. He simply removed his cloak, wrapped it around Eamon's stiff shoulders, and began to pray again. Not in hope, not even in faith, but in remembrance. Because in that moment, he understood the sacred had not been spared. The monastery, once a fortress of belief, was now just another ruin caught in winter's slow, merciless hand. Even sanctity could freeze. Even scripture could fade. And even the faithful could forget how to wait for spring. Behind the chapel walls, Father Baruch whispered something unintelligible, a final word, or a plea, or perhaps a confession. And outside, beneath a sky that no longer held warmth, a crow took flight. Its wings beat against the white, breaking the silence like a heart refusing to stop. And somewhere, in that cold sky, a new chapter waited, its voice not yet heard, but near, very near. The great hall was silent, not with the hush of reverence, but with the stillness of something abandoned. The tapestries once sang of lineage and valor, hunting stags, crusading knights, banners unfurled beneath golden skies. Now they sagged with ice, their threads stiff as old wounds. Wind slipped through the arrow slits, hissing like breath drawn between clenched teeth. A fire coughed in the hearth, more smoke than flame, rising in trembling curls against soot-blackened stone. The warmth had long since fled. All that remained was the memory of its comfort, and the echo of footsteps that had not returned. Lady Sel sat alone on a long wooden bench, the velvet worn beneath her hands. Once praised for her grace, for the way she moved through court like through stained glass, she now sat still, wrapped in furs that could not reach the cold in her bones. The fur muff did not mask her trembling, and the silence only deepened her gaze. Before her knelt her daughter, a child of perhaps 6 winters, her hair thin and fine as spun gold. Isel's hands moved slowly, threading a ribbon. Through the child's braid, a pale blue ribbon frayed at one end, stitched years ago by a mother long dead. Her fingers were numb, each motion sacred, each touch a defiance, because in the absence of music, ritual was all that remained. Outside, guards stood on the battlements like statues left behind. Their cloaks were crusted with sleet, their eyes fixed on the horizon that never changed. The moat, once rippling with geese and fish, was now frozen flat. A dead mirror that reflected only grey skies and darker thoughts. No messengers had come. In weeks, no cards, no bells. The world beyond the castle had vanished into white. Lord Reynard had ridden south before the first snowfall. War was promised glory, duty, land. He had not returned, not a letter, not a whisper. Only silence carried northward by the wind. The servants no longer speculated aloud. They bowed deeper, walked softer, eyes lowered when he sailed past. But she heard the whispers echo through the stone. She had stopped asking questions. The castle offered no answers. Each evening, she walked the corridors with a single candle, its flame bending beneath each draught. Her fingers traced the walls, rings clicking faintly, like distant bells in a ruined abbey. She moved not like a queen, but like someone haunted by a memory still wearing her name. Her son, barely 12, had fallen ill the month after the frost claimed the orchard. At first, it was only a cough or light, hollow, forgettable. Then the blood came. The physician wrapped him in wool and prayers, placed hot stones at his feet. He prescribed silence, sleep, submission. When his celled asked for truth, the man turned away, and so she sat by her son's bedside, night after night, listening to his breath grow shallow, to his dreams speak of horses, of sunlit fields, of his father's return. She never left him unattended, save for one moment. In a forgotten corner near the scullery, a maid had found a bird, a sparrow, perhaps, frozen mid-flight, its wings outstretched, its eyes wide, caught in a final act of motion. She brought it to Isolde, said nothing. And Isolde took it, cradled it, and placed it beside her son's pillow. A thing once free, she whispered, now at peace. Her daughter clutched her sleeve, watched in silence, learned what it meant to love in winter. That night, the halls remained unlit, save for the lanterns she herself carried. But then, something shifted. Isolde lit every candle she could find, every taper, every stub, every votive that had once graced feast or christening. She placed them around the hall, on ledges, in alcoves, atop shields and beneath broken windows. They flared hesitantly, then bloomed. Hundreds of small, golden flames dancing against the stone like souls refusing to leave. She sat in their center, silent, unblinking, wrapped in shadows and fur and flame. And the light cast shapes on the walls, not just her own. Knights returned, in silhouette tall and proud, shields on their backs. She saw angels with broken wings, draped in the smoke of old incense, and beasts, crawling, watching. Some shaped like fear, some shaped like grief. She did not flinch. She watched them flicker, and she waited for hoofbeats on the frost, for the sound of armor on stone, for her son's cough to cease or resume, for the chapel bell to ring again, even if only to toll for the dead. The snow continued to fall beyond the glass. The drifts rose against the castle's bones, and still she waited. Because in winter, the heart forgets how to hope, but not how to wait. And within that waiting, there was defiance, a kind of faith older than prayers. In the lowest tower, a rope broke from ice weight, slamming like a whip across the tiles. No one moved. In the kitchen, rats chewed silently at dry flour sacks. In the stable, a single horse shivered, and above, in the solar, the wind moaned through the high windows, a lullaby for those left behind. Her daughter fell asleep against her lap. The ribbon still held Dot, and Iselle sat still between the flames, a queen not of land or power, but of silence, of watching, of enduring, because somewhere beneath the snow, spring still lived, buried, waiting, and somewhere, far beyond the moat, a man rode northward, tired, wounded, bearing the memory of her name. But for now, only the candles knew, and they burned. They burned like witnesses, unblinking. The cart came again this morning. Its wooden wheels groaned over frozen ruts, splinters shrieking against ice-laced mud. Like bones dragged across stone. No voices greeted its rival. No doors opened. No prayers rose. Only the soft tolling of a single bell, a hollow, tired sound. Swallowed by a sky heavy with snow, the cart paused in the square. The oxen steamed at the flank, breath mixing with the slow flurry falling like ash. Bodies were all ready, waiting wrapped in linen, frozen stiff, lined like forgotten gifts against doorways. Some had names. Others had none. No one marked them now. Behind a warped pane of bubbled glass, Runner watched. Her hands were pressed flat to the window, the cold biting through her skin, numbing everything but the ache behind her ribs. Her brother lay atop the pile in the cart, his face covered, but the boots still his. She had helped him tie them last week when he could still walk. Asterisk when he whispered her name like a question. Her mother had gone days before. The burial had been hurried frostbitten. Hands, shallow earth, a rosary clutched between brittle fingers. They had spoken the old prayer, but the wind had carried it away. Her father, he had left 3 nights ago, said he would find food, or firewood, or hope. He had not returned. The healer's hut had burned last night. The fire reached so high it painted the snow red. Some said it was accident. Others whispered of witchcraft, of curses stirred in the belly of winter. The flames had revealed too much, faces illuminated in panic. Truth spoken too loudly in the crackling light. Faith had cracked with the frost. It used to be enough to kneel. Now even the friar wore a blade at his belt, a rusted dagger tied with a leather cord, once used to slice bread, now wet with darker things. Runner stepped away from the window. Her breath lingered a moment longer, a soft bloom upon the glass, before vanishing like all else behind her. Her sister coughed, a sound too soft to bear the weight it carried. Ragged, dry, almost apologetic. She was buried beneath quilts, face pale as the snow outside, eyes open but unfocused. She did not speak anymore, too cold, too tired. Runner knelt beside her, touched her forehead cool, but not yet deaf, then rose. Again, the hearth had been dark for 2 days. The rosemary bundles her mother once hung above the mantel still swung gently. Though the scent was fading. Once it meant protection. Now it meant memory, and memory brought no warmth. She lifted the wooden pail from its place by the door. Empty. The well behind the house had frozen. Even the bucket had cracked where the iron bands had split with the cold. But there was a stream. If you walked far enough through the woods, beyond the hollow where the snow turned blue with shadow, you might find it still flowing. Might. She wrapped herself in her father's cloak, the scent of pine and sweat, and the faintest trace of horses still clung to the wall. It swallowed her, but it steadied her. Outside, the cart rolled on. The driver hummed to him, off-key, a sound more habit than hope. Noon joined him. Not anymore. The hymn drifted, then faded. A dog barked once, a sharp note in the void. Then silence reclaimed the village. Candles flickered on fresh graves, placed there by children with hollow cheeks and eyes too old, little constellations of trembling light in a world gone dark. Runner stepped into the snow. The first step sank deep, then another, each one slower, heavier. Every step was a question whispered to the wind. Will I return? Will the stream be there? Will I die beside it? But she walked, past the shuttered houses with their sagging roofs, past the chapel where even the crucifix looked away, past the inn where laughter once poured like ale. She walked atop the snow, whispered. Beneath her feet, a sound like paper tearing, or the last page of a book unread. The forest met her with silence. The trees were black and brittle, arms raised skyward in frozen supplication. Icicles hung from their branches like teeth. She remembered her father's stories of beasts in the woods, of fair folk who walked in winter without leaving footprints, of spirits drawn to grief like moths to flame. She used to laugh. Now she listened for them dot the stream. If it still ran, would be beneath the rise, just beyond the ash grove, just beyond the place where the ravens nested dot. She kept moving. Her limbs burned, then numbed. Her breath formed clouds that broke and reformed. The pail knocked against her knee. The cloak tangled in her boots. She fell once, felt the sting of ice against her lip. But she rose. She did not call out. No one would answer dot at last. There it was. The faint sound like weeping, but steady, moving. Alive dot water dot. The stream was thin, barely a trickle, but it flowed. Over rocks crusted with ice, beneath branches heavy with snow. She dropped to her knees, plunged the pail into the current, watched it fill, watched it not freeze, and she cried, not loudly, not in grief, but from something older, something beyond language, the relief of motion, the defiance of stillness, the proof that something still moved, still lived. She drank, and it tasted of earth and stone and something clean. Then she stood. The forest was the same, the snow still. Fell, but something had shifted, something small. She turned back, the full pail heavy in her hands. Her shoulders bent, but her step steadier. Behind her, the cart would come again. The bell would toll. The village would sleep or starve or wait. But tonight, her sister would drink, and Runner would watch her breathe. And that would be enough dot for now. The hymn still echoed faintly in the air, a memory, not a song. But it followed her as she walked out of the white, through the silence, toward the flickering warmth of a promise carried in her hands. A raven landed on the chapel's cross. Its claws gripped the stone, shaking snow from its wings in slow, deliberate movements, as though even it felt the weight of the silence below. The sky hung low, a dome of pale grey, the light diffused, indifferent dot below. The courtyard lay still. untouched save for the faint imprint of bare knees in the snow, and Brother Seelin kneeling at the center, motionless. He had not spoken in 3 days, not since the vision. They had found him at the riverbank, alone, whispering to the ice, hands outstretched as if in benediction, eyes fixed on something not visible to others. Some said he wept, others said he laughed. None could say for sure, for after that, he had not uttered a word. Now he knelt in the courtyard, barefoot, stripped to his tunic, his arms spread wide like the crucified. Frost clung to his eyelashes, delicate as spider silk. His lips were blue. His breath, if it came at all, was silent. Yet he did not shiver. The snow fell heavier now, thick flakes like ash, descending in slow spirals. Inside the priory, candles sputtered as the elders gathered. Their robes were singed at the hem, worn from pacing. Their voices clashed low beneath the chapel rafters. Was it madness? Was it rapture? Some believed winter thinned the veil, that the cold made spirits audible, that a soul near death could touch the divine. Others feared it was a warning, a sign, a rot. The infirmary groaned with the sick. The grain bins whispered of hunger. The novices spoke in huddles. One claimed to have seen Brother Seelin levitate, rising an inch from the snow, as if lifted by invisible hands. Another said he'd walked across the cloister without leaving footprints. The abbot listened, silent. Beneath his cowl, by midday, the courtyard was nearly white. Only Seelin's dark figure remained, a single black mark in a sea of snow. Icicles hung from the chapel's eaves like fangs. The wind curled beneath doors, snuffed oil lamps, woke the bones of saints from their long sleep. At last, the abbot rose. He stepped into the snow, lantern in hand, a robe draped over one arm. His breath came in short clouds, visible prayers spilling into the cold. He did not speak. He simply walked past the dormitories, past the empty fountain, now frozen solid. Each step deeper into the courtyard was a petition. The snow hissed against his robes. His lantern swung. The raven watched when he reached Seelin. He stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, gently, he lowered the robe, reached to place it around the boy's shoulders, and found him rigid. His hands were ice, his limbs stiffened into devotion. His eyes remained open, but did not look skyward. They stared inward, as though fixed on something beyond flesh or stone or season. The abbot bowed his head. He did not weep. He did not speak. He simply placed a hand upon Seelin's crown and closed his eyes. Later, they brought him into the chapel. They laid his body before the altar, beneath the carved crucifix, where Christ's ribs were thinned with centuries of candle smoke. The nave was dim, and the cold had entered even here. Candles were lit small, flickering beacons against the dark. Psalms were whispered, voices low, trembling, as if afraid to wake something ancient. The abbot washed Seelin's feet with snowmelt cupped in his own hands, gathered from the eaves. He wrapped them in linen, tenderly, like swaddling a newborn. He went seeking God, he murmured, and perhaps found him. No one answered. There was no rite for such a death, no chapter in the missal, no bell tolled from the tower. The rope had frozen days ago, and the clapper was iced in place. But still the brothers came, one by one, hoods low, robes heavy with wet snow. They filed into the chapel and knelt, not in reverence, but in uncertainty. The silence was not reverent. It was questioning Dot who had Seelin seen. And if he had reached something sacred, why had it taken him? Above them, the stained glass caught the pale sun. Blue light fell like frozen tears across the stone floor. The image of Michael the Archangel shimmered faintly, his sword blurred by frost. Outside, the raven remained. It watched from its perch, tilting its head, unblinking. The wind moved through the gaps in the glass. Not a howl, not a moan, a breath, a slow exhale passing through light and time and prayer. Dot touched the flames of the candles, but did not snuff them. It stirred the linen on Seelin's feet. It lifted a corner of the robe, and then it passed. For a moment, those kneeling did not move. Even their prayers fell still, and in that frozen hush, something shifted. Dot, not loud, not visible, but deep. Dot in the marrow. Dot in the soul. Dot, it was not belief, but something older, a recognition of silence, of surrender, of a boy who knelt in the snow and did not flinch. Dot, somewhere beyond the stained glass, a crow called out, not mournful, not triumphant, just there. Dot, as if to say, he is gone, but you remain. And in the cold heart of the stone chapel, among relics and echoes, the snow still fell. But for a moment, just a moment, it felt as though it, too, had knelt. A single candle flickered in the SCRIPTORIUM. Dot, its flame bent in the draught. A trembling spine, a weary monk bowing low in prayer. Around it, the world was ice. Dot, frost laced the window panes, formed veins across the glass like pale scars. The ink in the wells had frozen again, and the quills to brittle, to thin-snapped if held too long. Yet still she wrote. Her name was Elwyn, asterisk, once the daughter of a disgraced nobleman, now cloistered behind stone walls, surrounded by parchment and penance. Her fingers bound in blood-streaked linen, clutched the quill with the reverence of a blade. The psalms flowed slowly, Latin letters born of breath and bone, scratched into silence with stubborn grace. She wrote not for glory, not for pride. She wrote for remembrance, for the souls no longer warm, for her sister, for her mother, for a god whose silence grew heavier with each snowfall. The abbess had warned her once, writing is for men. Words are their calling. Your place is in the hall, with the sick, with the cloth and the blade. But winter had no place for old rules. The monks had long since fled, carrying relics and keys, leaving empty cells and unanswered prayers. Only the women remained. They mended roofs with frozen fingers. They anointed the dying. They buried the forgotten. And Elwyn wrote, each night, as the wind howled like a dying choir, she lit her single candle, breathed upon the ink to thaw it, and pressed her soul into parchment. Beyond the scriptorium, the abbey whispered, footsteps on stone, a cough echoing like a drumbeat of doom, a child crying behind a closed door. Then silence again. The infirmary reeked not just of lavender and bile, but of fear too old to name. Yet no one wept. Tears wasted warmth, and warmth was prayer now. One night, her sister fell ill. The fever came quickly, a red flush blooming across her skin like spilled wine. On altar linen, she thrashed in her cot, murmuring their mother's name, though she had been buried to winters past beneath a hill of snow. And rosemary branches, Elwyn stayed with her through the dark, cool cloths pressed to a burning brow, fingers laced in prayer even when her voice failed. When morning came, she left her sister's side, stepped barefoot across frozen flagstones, and returned to the scriptorium. Her candle had guttered. Her breath fogged the glass. Still she wrote. Her script was no longer elegant. Letters sagged. Ink bled. But the words remained. Deus estate refugium. God is refuge. Not a promise, but a hope. And that, too, was sacred. The abbess died on the seventh night, her rosary still clutched in her fist. Lips parted, as though mid-hymn. They wrapped her in her habit and laid her before the altar, though the priest was long gone. Then the cook, then the last midwife. Names vanished like smoke. Snow piled high against the abbey walls, burying the path to the garden, burying the world beyond. No one came. No one would. Still Elwyn wrote, with hands that trembled, with eyes hollow from loss, with ribs that rattled with hunger. She wrote the final line, a blessing for no one in particular, a psalm for no one left to read. Then she closed the manuscript. She tied it with cord made from frayed vestments, kissed its spine, and placed it beside the hearth. Though the fire had long since died, no warmth to guard it, only faith. She opened the chapel doors. Snow rushed in, white and silent, like 1,000 moths descending at once. She stepped into it barefoot. No robe, no cloak. The cold clutched her like a lover. She did not flinch. Her feet left prints small, fading crescents, trailing toward the edge of the woods. Toward the old oak tree. It stood bent beneath the weight of snow, its branches knotted with age and memory. Once, beneath that tree, her father had taught her the letters, had pressed her fingers to a psalm carved into bark, had told her that names could outlast death if they were written carefully. Now, she returned to it. The wind erased her footsteps quickly, as if the earth itself wished to keep her passing secret. By the time the dawn came, no trail remained. No voice, no cry, but the book stayed, nestled near the hearth, its pages stiff with cold, its ink flaked like ash. It waited. Days passed, then years. The abbey fell to ruin. The scriptorium's roof collapsed. The beds grew moss. The altar cracked. But the book remained. One day, far from now, a traveler would find it, would brush away the dust, unwrap the linen, and read words that had survived snow, silence, and sorrow. God is refuge. And for a moment, even without knowing her name, they would remember, they would know. Someone once lived, once loved, once wrote. And that, in the heart of winter, where even fire had failed, a single girl had left a story behind, a breath held in ink, a soul wrapped in scripture, a light flickering long after the candle had gone out.